This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
And welcome to the X-Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together, you and I cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X-Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X-Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern on the Talkstar Radio Network, X-Zone Broadcast Network, UK High Definition Radio, Euro High Definition Radio, Star Cable, and our growing family of broadcast affiliates right across Canada, the United States, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, the Pacific Rim, Asia, Africa, and Europe. Toll-free worldwide, 1-800-610-7035. Email xzone at xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv at hotmail.com. And our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. My guest this hour, X-Zone Nation, is Michael Clarkson. We're going to be speaking to Michael about Poltergeists, a new look at Ghostbusters, flying phones, and floating beds. And Michael, welcome to the X-Zone.
Yes, thanks for having me, Rob.
Tell me, where did your interest in poltergeists, ghosts, flying phones, and floating beds come from?
There was a seed, I guess, planted about more than 30 years ago in the case of the move when the police officers in St. Catharines, and I was working in the area at the time in the back burner, but something seemed to be legitimate about this case, and so I sort of followed other poltergeist cases through the years, and voila, I just sat down one day and said, I'm going to write a book about it because it seemed interesting.
Now, the poltergeist that you're talking about was over a pizza parlor on Church Street, and it was well witnessed and documented by members of the then St. Catharines Police Department, which is now part of the Niagara Regional Police. I believe that there was a priest involved. There were 4 or 5 police officers witnessed the different events, and it was all seemed to be concentrated around a young teenage boy who lived there with his parents. Am I correct?
Yes, actually, Rob, he was 11 years old, and he lived with his parents and younger brother, and it seemed to be a sort of a traditional European home where the children were to be seen and not heard, and I think this boy seemed to be feeling repressed, and these strange occurrences kept going on around him. Strange things were happening. Pots were flying. Parents became very upset. They checked with the city people, the hydro people. They thought there was maybe something wrong with the building because things were going off the wall. And eventually, yes, you're right, the entire shift of police officers, the police came in.
That has to be one of the most famous Canadian cases, but when people think about poltergeists, they think about that little girl on TV who sat in front of the blank screen and said, "They're here." How true was that to what you believe is poltergeist? Does it have something to do with the paranormal, or is it telekinesis?
Actually, I reviewed Rob 75 cases, and all I can tell you was the trends and common denominators which came from these 75 cases. And what I found was that poltergeist energy or poltergeist seemed to be haunted people rather than haunted homes. I believe the Poltergeist movie, the house was centered over an Indian burial ground that had to do with spirits. But I found in my research that I was going to actually call this book Psychic Tantrums at one point, because I think it has indeed to do with a young person going perhaps through puberty who has an unusual energy. And you mentioned the word telekinesis, which is also known as psychokinesis. Actually, we call poltergeist energy a form of that, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. That was a term coined by William Rolle, a famous parapsychologist. So I think that, at least in my research, there are cases of haunted people with unusual energies they don't know how to control, perhaps it's subconscious, but whenever they're in the room for a short period of time, all kinds of crazy things are going on, including police officers who have been sitting in chairs.
Michael, you and I have to take a commercial break. Please stand by. Michael Clarkson's our guest. He's the author of The Poltergeist Phenomena. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Michael Clarkson's our special guest this hour. He's the author of The Poltergeist Phenomenon, an in-depth investigation into floating beds, smashing glass, and other unexplained disturbances. Describe what a poltergeist is and how it differs from a ghost for us, Michael.
Sure. And the common trends I found in my case is the poltergeist case generally has an agent, as we talked earlier, usually an adolescent entering puberty, immediately around whom the strange occurrences occur. He or she is usually quite intelligent, and there's usually some sort of repression or frustration of the poltergeist agent by others, a high level of stress in the household, usually only a lifespan of 1 week to several months, although there are some exceptions, and dramatic events, unexplained knocking, electrical malfunctions, movements of objects, occasionally reported levitation. Now, I've had a couple or 3 cases perhaps where there seems to have been spirits involved, but most parapsychologists these days, they say they think it's a case of haunted people rather than haunted houses. However, there is a Virginia psychiatrist, Dr. Ian Stevenson. He thinks there's still a link between spirits of the dead and poltergeist activity, and he sometimes suggests to families that a seance be held to cleanse a home. But in the main, I think the spirit theory is gradually over the years sort of fallen by the wayside in poltergeist research.
Tell me, Michael, how rare are poltergeist cases and how often are they actually reported?
Actually, I think they are very rare, and unfortunately, because of the dynamics, the family dynamics, they don't want investigators to come in. So usually only about 12% of actual rare poltergeist cases are investigated. So you can see how hard it is to get a line on these things, how hard it is to investigate these things.
Should people who are involved in a poltergeist be afraid of the poltergeist activity? Is it dangerous, and is it harmful to them and those around them?
It can be. There were about a dozen cases I had where people were harmed. However, none of them were serious. And usually it's a case of the poltergeist agent subconsciously being mischievous rather than harmful. Now, I have a little section in my book called Help for the Victims in case a family believes they have a poltergeist in their home. Do you want me to read a little bit?
Sure, please do, yes.
Yes. How does one get rid of alleged poltergeist? Most cases of poltergeist activity seem to die a natural death after a few weeks or months, and sometimes it eases with a feeling, of stress in a household. Sometimes the occurrences end when the agent realizes he or she is the cause. Other times psychotherapy seems to help. Exorcisms don't seem to work, but clergy and parapsychologists report some relief in the victims when they counsel the family. If the stress in a family is addressed, paranormal activity will often disappear. And in case, there's another case, Stephen Mera, who is a parapsychologist in Manchester. He does not claim to be able to get rid of poltergeists. He told me, most of all, our investigations help the family through the crisis, giving them information, support, and assistance, and we try to identify what is causing the occurrence. Trying to find out what's causing the occurrences, never mind trying to make them go away.
So, what are some of the common threads, the commonalities between people who have poltergeist experiences?
Yes, there's a lot of commonality, but I think one thing I neglected to speak about is how these poltergeist agents do it, or how we think they do it. I think they tap into an unknown source of energy. In fact, I think their brains may be a little more unique than the general population, slightly higher rate of epilepsy and schizophrenia. But I think these unusual brains tap into a nearby electrical source, whether it's geomagnetic storms, household electricity, even magnetic fields. And then somehow they're causing gravity to be suspended. There's a term for this. It's called the zero-point theory or zero-point energy. We don't exactly know how this works, but I think it's got something to do with our fear system. And as I mentioned, the psychic tantrums, when we get all worked up, then we go into our fight or flight mode. And I think these agents find a way to express themselves in their house than to manifest these crazy things, these chairs moving and beds floating. So as you can see, Rob, it's a very complex issue, and unfortunately there seems to be fewer funds available right now in poltergeist research, so we're sort of at, I think, a bit of a standstill in this area of research.
How serious is poltergeist activity taken by mainstream science and the mainstream medical community?
Not very. There are a number of cases which I have in my book in which there is fraud involved. Some cases are outright fraud. There are some cases in which there are legitimate poltergeist activities, and yet the kids can't make it happen when there are media in the room or parapsychologists. So they tend to kick over a lamp, and they want to maintain attention. In other words, kids being kids. So skeptics, scientists will say, "Aha! See, I told you there was nothing to this case." But I think mainstream science, yes, is very skeptical. There's a doctor at Laurentian University in Sudbury, Dr. Michael Persinger. He's fairly skeptical, but he keeps an open mind. He's actually testing an agent right now, a Canadian woman who I can't name because of the stigma involved in this paranormal subject. But he's testing her. He thinks there may be something to it. He thinks that she may be able to transfer her poltergeist activity into psychokinesis, which is a more conscious using the mind to make things move. She's created a little pinwheel out of a pencil and a piece of paper, and she seems to be able to make the pinwheel move just through the force of her mind. Now, if a guy like Dr. Persinger can establish this as fact, then I think some of his borderline scientists, we'll call them, may fall into place, and maybe they'll be more accepting.
You know, Michael's very well known throughout the paranormal community. He's done extensive research on the connection between sightings of UFOs and Earth anomalies. So to hear him involved with the parapsychology and the poltergeist doesn't surprise me at all. 1-800-610-7035. My email address is xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com. My guest this hour is Michael Clarkson. He's the author of The Poltergeist Phenomenon. And have you ever been part of a paranormal experience yourself, Michael?
It depends what you mean, Rob, by paranormal. I have had so-called in-the-zone experiences in my life, and I've been researching fear in the fight-or-flight system a lot. I've had what I would term, for lack of a better phrase, out-of-body experiences when I've been under pressure in deadline situations as a newspaper reporter in amateur sports, where I've seen things seem to happen in slow motion. You'll hear this all the time from athletes and accident victims. I think it's part of the fight or flight system, giving us supposedly more room and time to deal with a threatening situation. Now, there's quite a leap, I think, between that and actually making things move with your mind. But some people could argue, well, Tiger Woods or Jack Nicklaus in their heydays could actually will that golf ball into a hole. So it's hard to prove, but I think because we all have the fight or flight system hardwired into us, I think we have more abilities, especially involving our focus, than we realize.
All right, so when you were talking about Tiger Woods and Jack Nicholson, do we know this for a fact that they actually willed their balls into the hole and that it wasn't through skill?
Obviously, it's probably mostly skill. No, we can't prove it. Unfortunately, we can't hook people up to brain wires in the middle of battle because it is a terrible distraction. I think that's why people who claim to be psychokinetics who can move things with their mind. When they're actually tested,
Mm-hmm.
they feel very distracted because these people are watching, so it's hard to duplicate that. So I'm not sure if we're ever going to be able to prove this. There have been some cases, if you want me to talk about that now, where agents have been tested.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly the most compelling evidence was a woman in the 50s and 60s by the name of Nina Kulagina. It's Kulagina, in case your listeners want to YouTube her. There's some videos of her. Initially, she had poltergeist activity allegedly in her apartment, and then the Soviet scientists got interested, including 2 Nobel laureates. And they tested her often in closely controlled lab conditions, and they claimed that she could move things by focusing tightly with her mind. In fact, she was sometimes put into a cage to prevent trickery.
Wow.
And sometimes things were put in a plexiglass cube with video cameras rolling. Now, no one ever caught her cheating. But these cases seem to be far and few between. There was a lab at Princeton University in which a scientist by the name of Robert John, quite respected, he and his colleagues believed that they produced good experimental data to support the existence of PK, or mind over matter. They said that some people were able to influence small balls and pendulums through the force of their mind. But as I said earlier, partly to your point about mainstream science, there seems to be a bit of a drop-off. I know William Roll, who's been the #1 poltergeist hunter over the decades, he's in semi-retirement now, and no one seems to be taking up his mantle. And some of these university labs are either closing or they don't have as much research money. So this is a very difficult field to investigate as is, but without the will to do it, without mainstream science on board, without the funds, it's going to be increasingly difficult in coming years to do so.
So how do we differentiate between real cases and cases that only occur when there's no one around to investigate them?
It seems in the cases I've investigated, there is someone around, not necessarily to investigate, but the family members are around. In other words, the family members seem to be part of the cause. Now, how many times do they report this to investigators? Who knows? So there actually may be more poltergeist cases going on than we suspect. However, if it does get to the stage where there's being damage in an apartment or a house, glasses, cups, going over for a 2-week period, usually a family will contact someone, whether it's hydro people, whether it's the city, wondering about fault lines. So usually someone who gets involved, and of course the media gets wind of poltergeist, a little catchphrase, and it's always a sexy story. So I tend to think that most legitimate poltergeist cases do eventually get around to being reported, but as I say, they're still quite rare. Although they are reported throughout the world.
Michael, stand by. We've got to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Michael Clarkson is our guest, X-Zone Nation. He's the author of Poltergeist Phenomenon. We'll be back on the other side of this news break talking more about poltergeist as the X-Zone continues from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. My name is Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Our special guest this hour is Michael Clarkson. Michael is the author of The Poltergeist Phenomenon, an in-depth investigation into floating beds, smashing glass, and other unexplained disturbances. And it is published by our good friends at New Page, and it's available at www.newpagebooks.com and www.warwickassociates.net. When it comes to the investigation of a poltergeist case, how do you, as a researcher, validify the claims of a person or a family that claimed to have been involved in a poltergeist if you get there and there's no evidence of any poltergeist activity?
Yes, I've actually never been to a poltergeist house while a case was going on. In fact, the reason I became interested in this was I covered police reporting for about 13 years in the Niagara region. And after the St. Catharines case, I sort of put that on the back burner, but I came up with these other cases where these police officers kept talking about witnessing phenomena, and I thought, well, when cops talk, I tend to listen. Now, because we don't have, it's hard to test poltergeist agents. In fact, even if there is, I'm not even 100% sure there is poltergeist activity. Everything's alleged, everything's reported. But I think there's enough suggestive evidence to go to the next level. And I think the cops take us there, because I came up with at least 51 police officers around the world in 17 cases since 1952 who claim to have seen poltergeist activity up close. Now, when they go back to the cop shop and they say they've seen this, I tend to believe them because they've got everything to lose. They've got their sergeant's going to laugh at them. They're going to lose their credibility. So I think that's the best evidence we got of that there is poltergeist activity.
But wouldn't there be more police officers and more professionals reporting it if it really was legitimate instead of just a few numbers?
I don't think those are real small numbers in light of the cases which are investigated, because it's such a rare event. And then on top of that, of course, there may be some police officers who fit that mold I just talked about, who don't want to go back to the police station, who may say, well, yeah, it was just a kid kicking over some lamp. So there may be a lot of those cases, but I think 51 cops in 17 cases they're not small numbers when you talk about a subject which is so hard to define and so rare.
But aren't they small numbers if you take the number of police officers, for example, in Canada, who have not reported poltergeist activity or who have been dispatched to alleged paranormal activity and have found absolutely nothing?
I would have come across those cases, Rob, and I haven't. In fact, it's so rare. I don't have a case in Toronto in my book, and I've reviewed 75 cases from all over the world. So it's extremely rare. So it's not surprising to me that there have been a lot of fraudulent cases, although I do have, in my book, I've got, I think, 15-page chapter on cases of fraud where cops have come across something, not only cops, but parapsychologists, and they themselves have said it's just a case of a kid trying to fool people.
So let me ask you again, how do we differentiate between a real poltergeist and a fraudulent poltergeist if there's no evidence to substantiate the occurrence as it's happening, or evidence?
Yes. I think, again, though, we go by the cops. When this St. Catharines case, I think, is pretty airtight as far as witness evidence goes, because there's been no one come forward, as far as I know, in the last 40 years since this case occurred, to talk about cheating. Usually there's a leak in a case. I think Jimmy Hoffa is the only case we know of from the past where there was no leaks. We don't know where the hell Jimmy Hoffa is. Every other case, I think that's why we can prove JFK was shot by one guy, because really nobody's come forward to say, and usually people have an axe to grind. People have something to gain by leaking information. Well, no one in this St. Catharines case has come forward. Not one cop has come forward to say, this was just a big joke all along, 40 years later. No one has done that. So I think they're pretty airtight as far as witnesses go, cops are.
All right, but let's take a look at it from another aspect. There are those psychologists, psychiatrists, and even members of the paranormal community as parapsychologists who believe that poltergeist activity may in fact have something to do with child abuse and child molestation. Now, going back 41 years ago, that would be a big taboo subject, wouldn't it?
Yes, although I think the boy himself in that particular case, he came to my house for an hour or two one night years later. I think he would have mentioned that. And I understand what you're saying, but there's at least, I think, if not physical child abuse, I think there are probably some emotional abuses going on in these families. In other words, there wouldn't be psychic tantrums if the kids knew any other way to express themselves. So I think there probably is some form of psychological or emotional abuse going on. But
so
how do we prove this? I don't know. I think we're just left with what we have, and to try to weed through it and see which cases we think are good and which are fraudulent. And of course, there's lots of those cases in my book. But no, I think I'm fairly confident. I wouldn't have come forward with this book. I mean, I'm pretty skeptical. I was a police reporter for many years. People have always tried to sell me things, and I don't believe most things. I don't even think there's really proof that a God exists. So when I come forward, I think, and do a book like this, at least I believe in my mind that there is something to it.
So is it fair to say then, based on the expertise of credible doctors and credible scientists, that poltergeist has nothing to do with a so-called paranormal aspect, that it's all part of one's mental abilities?
Depends, Rob, the term paranormal, what does it mean?
All right, when I talk about paranormal, I'm talking about ghosts, things that go bump in the night, the other side, back from the dead. This is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the unseen forces that toss stuff around. Yes.
In the cases I reviewed, I say there's only a very handful of cases what involve the spirits. I tend to think it's a super-natural event. In other words, somehow linked to our fight or flight system. We don't know how, and it seems to be rare, and there seems to be a number of things going on around which the poltergeist agent taps into, i.e. the electrical disturbances, the household electricity, perhaps the psychic tantrums because they're being repressed. So, I think, I'm fairly confident that this is a natural, albeit a super-natural event.
Has there ever been a poltergeist case where the agent wasn't a child or a teenager?
Yes, there have been a few. The case I alluded to earlier of a woman in Canada, she doesn't want her name used, she claims to have had poltergeist activity. She's now in her mid-40s. She claims to have had poltergeist activity through her, I think it was through her teenage years, but it still continues to this day. She claims that dishes start to rattle and appliances start to move when her husband gets her upset. Now she wants to become a scientist. Her case is very interesting, I think, on a number of levels. I can't say what science she's getting into because it would tend to identify her. But
why wouldn't she want to be identified?
Because of the stigma involved. I mean, I took a big chance. I've written 7 books on fear, which were legitimate books.
Yeah.
I took a big chance and got raked over the coals already for doing a poltergeist book. The last book I did was on Glenn Gould, the pianist, last year, His Secret Life, and a reviewer from the National Post. Pretty well, one of the reasons she poo-pooed the book was she said, well, Clarkson, he's written a book on poltergeist. So you can see the stigma involved. In fact, in this particular woman's case, I mentioned she'd been investigated, tested a little bit in Laurentian University in Sudbury. Well, she couldn't make the pinwheel move in Sudbury, but that night at the hotel, she phoned back the Persinger, who sent one of his assistants, and the assistant apparently saw the wheel move. Now, I asked Persinger, can I interview this assistant? He said, by all means, no. You want this boy's name to be put in the media, and then he's going to be blackballed for life by mainstream science, because mainstream science, when they look at the paranormal, they're very, very cynical about it.
Or is it that mainstream science is much more careful in making claims than pseudoscientists are?
It's both. It's both, but they tend to throw out, a lot of times, they will throw out the baby with the bath water. In other words, they'll just say there's nothing to the poltergeist claims, there's nothing to psychokinesis. And yet in individual cases, we start looking at some of these cases individually, there may be something to them.
You see, there may be, but we don't know for sure there is.
No, we don't. There's still a lot of things in our world that we don't understand, I think. I think we're learning new things all the time. But for some reason, we have to have an answer. I think it's part of our quick fix society. We have to have an answer.
How long has poltergeist been being investigated? When you take the St. Catherine's case alone, over 40 years, that's not a quick fix.
It hasn't been investigated over 40 years. It was investigated for less than 2 weeks. So what I'm saying is you're asking me to give you a definitive answer, a black and white answer, and there is none, because it's a field what is on the very fringes of super-natural.
What are the qualifications of the people who actually investigate these claims?
Well, they are called parapsychologists. They have education, often in science fields, but they're not really held up as experts as far as mainstream science goes. So I'm not saying there are poltergeists.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is I've talked to a number of police officers who swear they've seen this activity, and I'm saying there's enough suggestive evidence to at least investigate it further, or at least look at this subject further. But of course, it's very frustrating to investigate it because of all the reasons we've talked about, the stigma involved, needing proof, the lack of research money, and the attitudes of mainstream science.
So what, if anything, have we learned from the poltergeist cases that have already been investigated to some extent?
Well, I think we may have learned. We don't know for sure, of course, but I think we have more abilities. Our fight or flight system is much more complex than we thought it was. And if indeed these things are manifesting themselves in the movement of objects, then I think that's a very interesting thing. We can prove to a point that our fight or flight system results in things like amazing athletic accomplishments because they are physical feats, also involved with mental activities. But I think fight or flight needs to be studied a little more intently before we perhaps can accept something like poltergeist activity, which is one step beyond that.
So let me ask you this question. In which direction do you believe, after researching poltergeists as you have, should the mainstream science pursue this phenomenon?
Well, they're not. They're not pursuing it.
No, that was my question. How, in your opinion, should they pursue it?
Well, first of all, I guess they should keep an open mind, and they should. I've asked Amazing Randy this question, and he just poo-pooed it. He didn't get to first base. No, it's all fraud. So the open mind, obviously, is the number one thing, and then perhaps taking some of these cases and trying to pick them apart. Now, you can't do it when it's ongoing because the families are just paranoid. They won't let people in unless they have no other alternative. Perhaps studying some of the cases I have in my book, putting some money into it, interviewing the people with an open mind, not the way someone like the Amazing Randy does it. He shows up at the Poltergeist event in Columbus, Ohio, and on the doorstep he says, there's nothing to these things. Then he has to interview the people. Well, they're not going to give him a good story because they're going to feel like they're being ridiculed. So I think first and foremost there has to be an open mind as we approach these types of subjects.
Tell me, are there psychological exams done on the people who claim to have these poltergeist experiences?
Yes, there have been some psychological and emotional tests, and usually there are some problems. There are some defense mechanisms, perhaps, what kick into place when they're under stress and under pressure in their families. They tend to feel insecure. They tend to feel like people are not listening to them, and they seem to think there's no other way to get attention than to have these crazy things going on, although, as I say, they don't know how they're doing it. They're perhaps doing it only subconsciously.
All right, Michael, please stand by. You and I have to take a commercial break. By the way, Michael, do you have a website our listeners can go to?
Yes, www.michaelclarkson.com, and reach me at michael.paul.clarkson@gmail.com.
All right, stand by. www.michaelclarkson.com is his website. We're talking about Michael's book, The Poltergeist Phenomenon, an in-depth investigation into floating beds, smashing glass, and other unexplained disturbances. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as we continue here in the X-Zone from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Michael Clarkson's our guest. And Michael, what is the opinion of the religious community when it comes to poltergeist activity?
I think they tend to think that it's got to do with spirits and or demonic possession. But I really shouldn't be speaking on behalf of the entire religious community. I'm sure in different cultures that they have different opinions. There was a case actually in India not long ago, a couple of years ago, in a cop shop where all the police officers said the poltergeist activity was going on, and they brought in a religious person, and they concluded in their culture, in their minds, that it was some sort of a demonic possession. So, as I said earlier, people have had, in different cases, they've had exorcisms and such, but it's inconclusive to say that an exorcism has stopped the poltergeist activity, because usually it ends by itself anyway within a couple of weeks.
Here we are in the year 2011. Everybody's got a camcorder. Everybody's got the ability to record video on their cell phones. Has any good video proof of poltergeist activity surfaced? That's
the problem, Rob. Things can be faked, so it's hard to separate them. There have been some photos, as I mentioned earlier. Nina Kulagina, if you go on YouTube, you may see some decent videos, seem to be legitimate videos from the Soviet scientists from the 50s. But otherwise, it's so easy to fake. Who knows? If I come forward tomorrow with what I think is legitimate poltergeist video, then who's going to believe me?
Gotcha.
There have been a few. There was actually a case of a flying phone in Columbus, Ohio, in 1984, where a photograph was taken with a lot of people in the room with this telephone flying off this girl's lap. That seems to be the best recorded photo evidence of in poltergeist history.
In your opinion, who are the best parapsychologists that investigate poltergeist activity?
Yes. Well, William Roll, who's in Georgia, he's semi-retired now. He's by far the most respected in this field. There's a chap in Florida also called Andrew Nichols. Unfortunately, we've had a couple of the more leading ones pass on, Maurice Grosse, particularly in England. So it seems to be a field where I'm not sure if younger parapsychologists are taking up this mantle or not, but it seems to be falling by the wayside, the research, as far as upcoming years.
Michael, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. I wish you much success with your book, and we look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Yes, thanks for having me on, Rob.
Right, take care, sir. Bye-bye now. Exo Nation, Michael Clarkson has been our guest this hour, and Michael's website is www.michaelclarkson.com. He's the author of a new book entitled The Poltergeist Phenomenon, an in-depth investigation into floating beds, smashing glass, and other unexplained disturbances. I'll be back on the other side of the news at 6.5 minutes past as the X-Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our studios here in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Once again, 1-800-610-7035 worldwide toll-free. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com. Our website, xzoneradiotv.com. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. I'll be back at 6.5 minutes past the hour. Don't go away.